Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of the Wizard of Paws podcast, the greatest show about animals on the All Indiana Podcast Network. I'm your host, River, and I'm joined with my co-host,
Dr. Jace.
And we also have Alisa Keys, the former senior marine mammal trainer at the Indianapolis Zoo.
That's not Alicia Keys, not the singer though. But she's just as beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.
So, you used to work at the zoo. For those that are new to marine mammals, there's about 128 species that rely on the ocean to survive. And they don't represent a distinct biological grouping, but are unified by their reliance on the marine environment in order to feed. So what kind of animals did you work with when you were at the zoo?
When I was a marine mammal trainer, I worked with Atlantic bottlenose dolphins, Pacific walrus, polar bears, California sea lions, harbor seals, gray seals, just a plethora. Walrus was my favorite.
Love some walrus. So there was it's in their scientific name that they're called the tooth walker. You want to explain that?
Yeah. So they're called Odobenus rosmaris divergens. That's the Pacific walrus. And they actually, Odobenus, Odo is part of odonte, which is tooth, and then bene is part of benus, which is walker. So folks like to nickname them tooth walker. They like to use their tusks to pull themselves up the ice floes. They use them to protect themselves against each other. Both males and females have tusks. Some people have asked that question before, if the girls have the tusks too, and they do. And they can grow pretty big, and they're really super strong. So
I'd imagine so.
From the stuff I was briefing myself on earlier, it looked like they use that the term tooth walker comes from the fact that they also temporarily anchor themselves to the bottom of the ocean floor and stuff, so they can like get into the sand, and then they can look for like clams and other edible num-nums.
That's one of their favorites. They actually will use their tusks to hang out there on the bottom of the floor. They're benthic feeders, so they are gonna feed off the ocean floor. They're gonna eat lots of clams. Their suction power is so powerful they can suck a clam right out of its shell. They don't even have to pry it open. They like to eat sea cucumbers and sea worms and whatever they can get their lips on. And they actually use their vibrissae, and they move them around. It's like having a bunch of fingers on the front of their face.
This is a whole lot of stuff I never knew about walruses.
My brain went straight to the gutter on some of this terminology.
So much to learn.
Well, we already know that so they could probably get into some shells and probably pull like crabs out too, or what do you call those, hermit crabs?
Oh yeah, I could.
Eat those guys?
Yeah, those guys. It's like nothing to them. It's like just slurping up spaghetti. You know, they just suck it right out of there and get rid of the shell. They don't really eat the shell or anything. They just spit it out. Leave a little pile behind them.
Do they also eat corals too?
No, usually not. They do have teeth in their mouth. They have a little bit of a sharpness to them, not much. And then they have the two tusks. So generally the teeth aren't used for a whole lot because they typically swallow their food whole. They don't chew it.
So
That's a weird animal.
We were discussing earlier about them using their teeth to sit on the ice shelves, and they use their buoyant little air sacs in their throat to like keep themselves floating, so they can just kind of sleep like that. It's like an old man in a hammock, but like in icy water.
Exactly. Yeah, they use those pharyngeal air sacs. The males do, in order to blow up their little necks and kind of like a flotation device, and they hang out. And females, they don't really have the pharyngeal air sacs. The males do, and the males use them to make a belltone sound too, and sometimes it even attracts the girls. Yeah.
Hey, if the man can sing.
Exactly.
We call him the Justin Bieber of the marine mammal world there.
We're not going to call him that.
Well, can you tell our audience the difference between porpoises and dolphins?
A lot of people have asked that question. With dolphins, you're going to see that they'll have cone-shaped teeth. Dolphins and porpoise eat a little bit different types of fish and invertebrates. And a porpoise is going to have spade-shaped teeth. Also, if you look at their bodies, porpoise, they're not necessarily going to have a long rostrum. Typically, it's very blunt, so that's the front portion of their face. Porpoises also are smaller than dolphins. And dolphins, you can find them sometimes in the same areas as porpoise, but like I said, they're gonna eat a little bit differently. So
And for another identifier is that dolphins, they'll have like a hooked or a curved dorsal fin, and porpoises have a triangular shaped dorsal fin.
yeah, and sometimes their dorsals are a little smaller too, not as tall as the dolphins.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They are in the same scientific group,
Cetacean? Mhm.
Yeah, cetacea.
Mhm.
And there's about 30 species of dolphins, true dolphins anyway, correct?
Mhm.
About that?
30.
Yeah.
That's like a
Like
lot.
the bottlenose dolphin, spinner dolphin, spotted dolphin.
It even includes what they consider as the largest dolphin, which would be an orca.
Orca.
Hmm.
Like the whale?
The killer
Yeah.
whale, yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually a dolphin. I told you that a couple of years
Yeah.
ago. I don't know. Okay, so those of y'all that actually know us, you guys know that we typically deal with land animals. We don't actually have any kind of fish tanks because it's too darn expensive to maintain.
Right.
Can you tell us about maintaining the tanks over there at the zoo?
Maintaining the animals' habitats, the animals live within parameters that the U.S. government sets.
USDA.
Yeah, and then a lot of facilities, a lot of different zoos and aquariums will actually maintain guidelines within those limits. They'll make it even more stringent just because it's probably the best practice for the animal. They've realized that after lots of research and studying and watching the animals that they realize that, we can make things even better for them. So
Smaller tanks make zoonosis, which
Yes.
means your dolphins and whales are swimming back and forth in the same spot over
So
and
we
over.
want as much space as we can get. And we also want to provide enrichment for the animals. That's super duper important.
Yes.
So a lot of facilities you'll see will provide things like Jell-O, ice, toys that they can forage with. They'll do games. Even their training is considered enrichment as well, because some of the behaviors that they're doing throughout a session, which would be like a certain amount of time or even a presentation for the public, is also considered exercise and also enrichment. So they're learning, they're keeping their minds moving, they're keeping their bodies moving, super important because these animals are going to travel lots of miles throughout the day. As far as their habitats, definitely saltwater is the best thing for all marine mammals. And there's even some stringent procedures that are being followed now for polar bears where they used to keep them in fresh water, and now a lot of facilities are having to switch over to salt water because
That's more natural in their habitat to begin
Yes.
with. They're not normally land mammals, and land mammals are drawn to freshwater. And any animal that dwells in a sea, whether it be North Pole, South Pole, it's definitely going to be, walking across salt water at some point. And while we're on the topic of polar bears, they are an endangered species, correct? Still.
they are considered endangered.
I think they're on the ICUN red
Yes.
list now.
Yes.
I don't know if you saw that photo of the emaciated polar bear.
Oh,
that,
yeah.
That was
Yeah.
running around. Now, what environmental causes do you think that humans have that create something like that?
I think a lot of it's overfishing, it's overpopulation. We have the depletion of Arctic ice. So these animals aren't getting seals hauling out onto these ice floes that they're able to swim from one area to another and go after seals.
They eat leopard seals, correct?
Oh, they like anything they can get their teeth on. So, yeah, they'll eat seals. They'll go after fish. They'll go after
I saw one.
anything that they can find. They actually they're really strong. They have a really
Omnivorous.
strong upper body, and they will stalk a seal under the ice. And they can tell where they're going to come up. And a lot of times the seals have little ice breathing holes throughout the area. So they'll kind of stalk them, and they'll get real low. And then as soon as they see them pop up, they'll pounce on them.
and grab them.
Yes. And so that's usually, it was really fun watching some of the animals at different facilities with their enrichment be given things like ice flow, like large ice blocks or ice toys, or even giant plastic barrels. Sometimes the bears would bounce on top of them and show that type of naturalistic behavior to try to get the food out of it. So really cool to watch them pounce.
We have an account with Kong Zoo, and they create all kinds of zoological enrichment products for animals that are in facilities like the Indianapolis Zoo and like ours. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the tricky treat ball. It's like a ball that you put like dog food in for your
Yeah.
domestic dogs.
Yeah.
We use that for our foxes.
Mm-hmm.
We put insects in it for our little fennec foxes and
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
like that, so they can forage out of that. So like,
Do they have one for polar bears?
did they have? Is that kind of like what
Polar
you're
bear
talking
Kong?
about?
You know,
Polar bear Kong.
we would take like boomer balls,
Boomer
large hard plastic balls for the animals, and we would drill holes into them.
Ooh, like a jolly ball almost.
Yeah, and then throw in, some ice, some clams, or some squid, or
Some little fish.
we'd also try different meats with them as well. Things like rabbit, emu, just chicken breast.
We try to follow a species-specific diet as much as possible, but I mean, we're in the United States. We're not, of course, we're not in Africa, so we don't actually have the actual, food that the little African foxes and genets would eat out there. So what we try to do is try to get it as close as possible. Is that what the zoo does as well?
Yeah, most zoos and aquariums, they will work on some type of diet for the animals. They actually, a lot of the animals in the zoo, especially marine mammals, they'll be part of most zoos that are Zoo and Aquarium Associated, or AZA, Association of Zoos and Aquaria. They will look at different guidelines and follow an aquarium care manual or a zoo animal care manual written by someone who has worked in the field for a long time and has gathered data and research from other zoos and aquariums in order to find out what is the best nutritional needs for the animals. And they'll work with nutritionists, they'll work with veterinarians.
That's my job.
You know how that is. Yeah.
He's a nutritionist. So we at our facility, we try to stick as close to that as possible. So we can't always do that. So we read a lot of scientific studies as well. So like, for example, there's only 4 studies out there on pale foxes. We're one of the only sanctuaries in the United States with a pale fox. San Diego Zoo doesn't even have one. So there was no information out there on them, and the only studies I found were written by one scientist, and it was just briefly. And so we kind of had to basically go on what, even though the fennec fox is a little further north in Africa than the pale fox, there is one part where their territory can overlap. So being able to notice what kind of insects and stuff are in that, and lizards and plant matter are in that kind of area is something that we have to research. Now, a lot of times, because our animals are either bred in captivity or they cannot be released in the wild, like anything that comes into like zoos and stuff like that, we get issues where captive bred animals have the propensity to become obese if they if they're not worked out enough, if they don't have enough enrichment, if they get depressed, stuff like that. So there's nutritionists that say, oh yes, this species, they're not successful all the time when they hunt in the wild, so you can do a fasting day once a week. So you can fast the animal once a week. Now, did you guys do that kind of stuff at the zoo, or?
Sure, yeah. We had, with our nutritionist at the zoo, which a lot of zoos and aquariums try to utilize nutritionists, even if they're not on staff and they're maybe with like Missouri or one of the main companies that make feeds for wildlife and for also farm animals and such. They might come in as well and be used as consult. They will do body morphometrics. We would, when I was a trainer, we would actually weigh, measure our animals as often as we could. We would weigh our animals every week, once a week at least.
Nice.
So
a lot of data from that.
Yeah, we would teach them to get onto a scale, and that was like, okay, that's our Monday thing. It's weigh day, for everybody.
A lot of our foxes, they're usually sold as pets, but they originated in fur farms. So a lot of times, spring and fall, they start their shedding because the fur is thicker than it would be if it was a wild fox. We have to literally, teach them how to be groomed by human beings because, how long a fox's canine teeth are. They're anywhere from 1.5 inches to 2 inches long, depending on the size of the fox. But, you got the 6 to 10 pound animal with 1.5 inch long teeth, and then you got these one specific line of foxes that were bred to be larger that has 2 inch long teeth, and we got one of those guys, Drax. So we actually created like a grooming table out in the animal enclosure as part of our enrichment. And what I did was I created a grooming table. I attached it to the fox box. This fox box is basically a dog house, but patent pending on the fact that it's going to be made out of biodegradable materials in the future, so we can not cut down as many trees. But what I want to do with it is be able to create these areas where we can like pop it together and take it apart like Legos almost, like giant Legos. And that way what we're doing is every month they have a different layout in their enclosures. So that way they're not getting bored by the same old thing every single time. I know that the zoos, you guys remodeled every few years. But a few years back you guys did the tiger enclosures. Now there's like a glass partition so people can walk through and see the tigers. Not every tiger's going to like that stuff, but, some of them do kind of like to hang out right there by the glass. I've been there a couple times since then.
Yeah.
They seem very curious about my service dog, but my dog is like, is this another dog or is this a cat? I can't tell, I don't know if I want to go near that glass,
Even putting different toys in an animal's environment is hopefully breaking up some of any kind of swimming pattern that they might have, changing their environment, maybe bringing them to a holding area, giving them access to outside so they have a choice. Do they want to stay outside? Do they want to come in? It's up to them. Giving them choices is super great.
That's what
for all the animals.
We're trying to buy a farm, and what we want to do is set up enclosures to where there's a really long barn on this property, and we want to set it up to where there's enclosures inside the barn, so they can have a choice to go inside, or they can have a choice to go outside. So we want to do 20 by 40 on the outside, and 20 by 20 on the inside, on
Nice.
each one. And foxes don't always get along with each other. We have one female that just cannot stand the other one. Do you guys get that issue with your marine mammals and stuff like that?
Marine mammals, like the walrus, are really gregarious. They typically will spend a lot of time sleeping together. Usually when you see them out in the wild, that's what they do. They sleep together on top of each other, all hunkered down, like big blobs. And we even had this little square space at the facility I was at, a square space where the animals could go in and it was flat, but it had a little bit of a lip on it, and they would all try to cram in there. 3 walrus. So you have like 3,000-pound guy with, a female that's about 1,500 or 1,800 pounds, and then a little guy that's, around 700 pounds, and they're all trying to squish together, and flippers are on top of each other's heads, and butts are in others' faces, and they would always try to do that, and the dolphins too. I mean, there were times where I call the dolphins divas. They're like divas of the ocean.
They are the divas.
I can see that.
They are total divas, and there are times where like females would be. You would go out for a presentation or just a session just to hang out and play and have fun, and the females would maybe leave and go by one of the males and wham, slap them in the head with their tail, and then go back and go, here I am. And the boys, they would have put their head down after they got smacked, and then they'd pop it right back up and look at you with these big bright eyes like, I think something happened, but I don't know if it happened for sure. But yeah, there were times where they would chatter back and forth across the pool. It's really hard with the dolphins because they're so, they use their echolocation. They use lots of body language too. Foxes. And when you're above the surface of the water and they're below, there are times where they are communicating and you may not be able to tell exactly what's going on. You may see the after effect. Mm-hmm. So, they could be hollering back and forth and not allowing another animal to come over near them. Or they may want another animal near them all the time, or they may leave and they want to go stay with another animal because they're in love with them that day, and then they go pick on somebody else. I mean, it is total like Young and the Restless with dolphins for sure.
That sounds similar with the foxes. One of our foxes, we call her Nebula. She's kind of a
shovel face.
Okay, she's not only got an underbite, she also has gingival hypoplasia where the gums grow over the teeth.
Oh, yeah.
Eventually it'll end up where we have to humanely euthanize because,
or buy stem cells.
We'll see. We'll see how it goes. It's one of those things where we, if you laser surgery, it has to be done twice a year.
Okay.
And it's like almost $4,000 per surgery. And do you know how many animals you could save with that much money?
You can buy 4 doses of stem cells.
Yeah,
I'm still on that from 2 episodes ago.
I'm glaring. For those who can't see, I'm kind of glaring at River right now. But I mean, you got to weigh the pros and cons when it comes to how many animals can you save with the money that you can spend. If you're I'm going to spend how much money per year on medical treatment for this animal. Is it really a good quality of life? Is this animal going to be in pain constantly? So you kind of there's one thing that I don't like is those rescues and sanctuaries. I'm air quoting this, rescues and sanctuaries that like to use their animals to get fundraising. And even if they put that animal down, they'll still use the photos to get money, okay? And it's like, we discussed it with Katya the cow, the cow that was paralyzed, could not move all 4 of its legs, and it was just laying on mattresses, and they had to literally use like a lift to lift it up, and they were just forking money. People were just donating hundreds of thousands of dollars to this facility, but they didn't want to put the cow down. It had no quality of life at all whatsoever. It couldn't walk around, so it had atrophied muscles, and it was sad.
Yeah.
It literally, looking at it made me want to cry. And so you got to look at the overall health, discussing it with veterinarians. Is it better to euthanize this animal and use the funding to save more animals? Could you tell a decision that you guys had to make at the zoo, an example of what you guys had to do?
I have to say that I was very lucky to work at a facility that would do nearly everything in their possible power to help animals there, especially marine mammals, at least in my experience. And we were very lucky to have some of the top veterinarians, lucky to have Purdue University close, because they would come down and help us with if we had to put an animal under and do some type of exploratory surgery or just general surgery. They were there to help us out. They knew their stuff when it came to having to anesthetize animals. It's really scary with marine mammals to anesthetize. They do deep dives. They do things where they shunt their blood to certain areas of their body. Dolphins you cannot anesthetize.
I'm not even sure how that would work.
Yeah, you have to just use a local
anesthetic, like Lido or something.
Yeah, or you might have to use some different medications that you would with a patient to decrease, some of that stress.
Keep them from freaking out on you.
Exactly. And with walrus, it was very scary because we would only try to keep them down for so long because we knew that there was a high rate of mortality. Yeah.
Because of their body weight?
Body weight, just logistically, how they're positioned, what procedure you're doing. I mean, several facilities have had to remove tusks because they become infected sometimes if the animal rubs their tusks. We try to prevent things like that, like putting caps on their tusks. We had IUPUI come out, and they would help us with making caps for the tusks.
The dental school?
Yeah, the dental school, the head of the dental school, he would come out, and we would make forms with clay. And then also with we would practice with clay until we got them to where they were used to it, because they had to hold it on there for
until it dried.
5 minutes or something.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was like that rubbery mold stuff that the dentist would come out and put it on there, and so we could get a really good form, because we want it really tight fitting. We don't want it to flare out, because then they can get it caught on something.
Yeah.
So we were super lucky. I mean, there were situations where we would have to make a last minute call and say, look, is this animal really going to have a quality of life, just like you might with your dog, your cat, your bird at home. And it's really hard and difficult when you've worked with these animals day in and day out, and you've trained them. You're with them more than you're with your family.
And do you guys have like a board of directors or an oversight committee that has to make those kinds of decisions, or do you guys allow the veterinarians to make
It's
those?
typically up to the veterinarians and the upper management to get with the entire staff. They were very good with getting with all of us. Is everyone comfortable with this decision?
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And if you're not,
That's what we do.
let us help you, come to terms, or if you have another idea. They would never put us down if we were nervous or concerned, or if we thought, oh, this might be the wrong decision. Usually when something like that happens, we're all pretty much on the same page because we know how difficult logistically it might be. Like perhaps if you had a polar bear or another large carnivore who, couldn't get up or something, you can't necessarily do surgery on that animal and then have to tend to its wounds every single day. You would have to put them under to do that every single day.
Yeah.
Especially if they're an old animal too, on top of it. So they're geriatric too, on top of it.
Yeah. And of course, geriatric animals, they can get dementia too, and they can forget you, and they can just resort to natural instinct. And the natural instinct of a polar bear, for example, would be to
rip your arm off and beat you with it.
Attack you and eat. Yes.
Yes.
I will pull off your neck. I will rip out your spine.
Yeah. Any type of procedure we would have different. Zoos usually have different levels of dangerous animals. Yeah. And they usually typically have a team on board that are there as safety with apparatus that will some animals it's shoot to kill. That's just how it is. But the veterinarians were always really good about making sure the animals were out completely, first of all, and then we would all be on certain safety doors, and we would be prepared, to do whatever we needed to do.
The Indianapolis Zoo had a cheetah get out of the cheetah exhibit a couple years ago, I think, and they did really well as far as locking down the area.
Oh, did they?
Really fast.
I didn't hear about it. Most AZA accredited zoos and aquariums, they will have practices so many times a year, and we will practice having drills where, a sea lion's out. Okay, what's a sea lion going to do? It might run over here, over to the party tent, or it might, go over this way and play in the grass. Depending upon the type, is it a female sea lion? Is it a baby sea lion? Is it a male who weighs almost 1,000 pounds? Ooh. So you got to kind of weigh out the different types of animals too, not only the species, but also
their behavior.
Yeah, their behavior, what you know about them. But then, if a tiger takes off, I mean, we would dress up. Some people would wear the costumes. Others would just wear like a colored, vest and say, okay, the tiger's wearing an orange vest.
That's like someone dressed up as a tiger.
But we would do practices, and then we would debrief after it and talk about certain situations or scenarios that might happen. We tried to be very, very safe and secure, and that's probably why we haven't had here in the city. We haven't heard so many, reports about animals escaping and such, because those types of things are done.
Let's knock on some wood.
Yes, knock on wood. Yes.
Yeah.
But super good at safety and security, I would have to say.
Yeah, we're accredited by Species 360, so we kind of know exactly how the rules and stuff are. And the good thing about being an accredited facility, whether it's with AZA or Species 360, is you got access to ZIMs, so you can find other animals that say you want to artificially inseminate one of your walrus, but you don't have a male walrus in that species at your facility. You can be like, oh yeah, San Diego Zoo has one. Let me call them up and see if they want to send us some frozen specimen for this little baby girl, so we can create some cute little adorable chubby little baby walruses.
There is nothing cuter than a baby walrus.
I know, right?
I mean, I do have to say, like hippos, like at Cincinnati. Oh my gosh, I follow them all the time with Fiona, and now the cute little guy, Fritz. Oh my gosh, so
they
cute.
post so much stuff about that thing.
They do, and he's so cute.
Hippos are just
I
water
can't handle
cows.
it. Yeah, they are.
They're water cows.
I can't handle it. I can't handle
cows.
baby. Yeah, I love baby animals. Oh my gosh, I will not. Like I always tell people, I'm like, I will not touch human feet unless they are baby feet, or I will touch feet if they're on an animal. Okay. Otherwise, I do not touch feet.
I touch a cat's toe beans, and I'm like, these are the beans of a killer.
These are killer beans.
These are the beans of a killer, Bella.
Yeah.
Twilight.
How exactly does someone inseminate a walrus?
Very carefully.
I'm just wondering whose job that is.
It takes lots of time and training. I have to say, just working with animals like that are 1,800 pounds. Can have definite attitude and just bulldoze you over like you're a speed bump. You have to be super
like Kagome.
Super careful and very aware of their likes, their dislikes, their body language, their grumbles.
Their vocalizations are very important. I tell
yes.
River that all the time. Vocalizations, their body language. You got to watch hackles when you're looking at canid species. You gotta make sure that you're, if you got cats, felids also have hackles as well, but we got a Bengal cat. The hairs on her spine, they just stick up naturally, and so you gotta know your cat's body language.
Yeah.
You gotta know their hair positions. You gotta know their ear positions are very important as well. The way they position their ears and whisker placement. The whiskers on a big cat will flatten. Their ears will go back. Their pupils will dilate. Yes. Whiskers on kittens, exactly. They will bite the crap out of you, and you do not want to get bit or scratched, even on accident by a big cat, because it hurts.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
I don't got time for all them stitches.
Yeah, we're always, working in a zoo or aquarium, there's some different levels of training. There's, you have hands-on training. You can have semi-protected contact. Let's say you're training through a pen or through a fence or bars.
Tongs.
Yeah, you can use tongs.
To feed them.
Long ass pair
Polar
of tongs.
bears, the zoo, they would use tongs or an apparatus someone came up with. It was looked like a long metal shish kebab stick with a square on the end so that it couldn't go through all the way. Like they couldn't pull it and take it from you.
Think more like
but
a
there's
chicken
also
trebuchet.
one of the hardest things to do is protective contact training, where you're fully away from the animal. It's really super hard.
It is.
But it's challenging, and it really gets the brain going of the individual involved trying to do that kind of training, and it's awesome. I mean, there was some protected contact training that we did with the polar bears, having them come up against the glass area outside in the habitat and putting their paws up so we could check out their paws.
Make sure there's
clever.
no fungus growing in between.
Making sure that that they don't have any scratches or lesions or anything like that on their paws.
It's like a
looking
game
at
to
their
them,
nails.
but you're
And
figuring
then
all that stuff out.
reinforcing them for that. Those
Mm-hmm.
were always my favorite behaviors, were husbandry behaviors, the medical training behaviors.
No, when we have like our land mammals and stuff like that, I mentioned fungal infections because you got dogs and cats and foxes and wolf dogs and coyotes and stuff like that at our place. So we usually check the feet to make sure there's no like fungal infections in between the toe pads and like in the webbings of their feet and stuff like that. Now, is that something that you would see often in polar bears since they're in the water quite often?
Not necessarily. Really, some of the only things we saw were when I worked at the zoo was, sometimes we would get flies bothering the polar bear's ears. So we would treat them. We taught them to hang out next to the pen area so that we could spray their ears with tea tree oil.
Yeah.
Nice.
To reinforce them with that. Nobody likes to get sprayed. But that helped. We really didn't see a whole lot of that. There might have been some type of something going on with a paw here or there, and it more than likely it was a lesion or just a scrape. We would try to work on them really showing us their feet, their mouths, especially
the mouth,
even working on injection training. So having the animal to where you put maybe some barricades up, like a large ice flow toy and a big barrel, and you make their space smaller so that they have to come forward and get reinforcement at the front of their little your enclosure within an enclosure. And then they would be up against the pen area so that we could work on touching them with a syringe, reinforce them, and then finally doing maybe a little bitty poke with a like a paper clip or something, and then finally actually doing the injection and just continuously reinforcing them.
Yeah, we vaccinate all of our animals with everything except for rabies, because in the state of Indiana you do need a veterinarian license to do the rabies vaccine, as opposed to Kentucky where you can actually do the rabies vaccine yourself. But so the ordering the vaccines, making sure that your vaccines in your fridge are staying in date. I mean, you're talking a tray 25 vaccines is like almost $600-$700 now. I mean, now it's like $1,200. It was $600-$700 a year ago, but now inflation is probably twice that. And I mean, the cost of veterinary care for a facility that gets is open to the public, gets plenty of donations like the Indianapolis Zoo, versus a facility like ours who we're not open to the public. We go to like we do educational seminars and guest lectures and stuff like that to try and raise money, and we barely break even on certain things. So like when I'm like, oh yeah, I got to be frugal about certain things, it's like I think we discussed this before about like antibiotics. Our veterinarian, little tiny, like 10 milliliter bottle of Clavamox is going to cost you almost $80 to $90 at the vet's office. But if you get a written script for Augmentin, which is the same medicine, and you just, get them to dose it out the proper way for the weight of the animal that you need. Well, I'm a pharmacy technician, so I already know all that stuff.
My husband's a pharmacist.
That's nice.
There you go.
So we always get the written script and take it over to like the Kroger pharmacy, and we can get that 60 milliliter bottle for $65.
Yeah.
I mean, so like being frugal about it. I used to work in a facility where we bottled the medications up that got shipped to like the veterinarian's offices, the ones that got shipped to Cardinal Health, and the ones that that went for over-the-counter sales for aquariums.
Yeah.
You don't need a prescription for those antifungals and antibiotics for fish, but you do for the other two.
Yeah.
At the hospital. But it's the exact same medicines. We just had different days. We slapped different labels on the bottles.
Yeah.
So like, and then they literally on the fish one it says not for human consumption.
Yeah.
I'm like, but this is the same one.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so we try to keep things as frugal as possible. Discuss things, send pictures to our veterinarian. He comes out to the house and does vaccines and stuff like that, because it stresses the animals out. Like, we were discussing, that there's not very many scientific studies out there on fennec foxes and pale foxes and stuff like that. So we kind of have to experiment with what's going to work with this species of animal. So fennec foxes, they require a lot of heat. Their body temperature, if they're under anesthesia, is going to drop down really low, and their mortality rate is extremely high when they're under anesthesia. We got ours spayed and neutered, and I used those little hand warmers and put them in their ears. And he said that's probably the most, my vet said that's the most ingenious thing he's ever seen. And I was like, well, I mean, their natural temperatures, I mean, the lowest it'll get at nighttime is probably, in the 50s. And then they den underground. So it's going to be warmer in the ground. So they're not going to have, their body temperatures drop down to like, 50 degrees. It's just way too cold. They're going to die that way. And with a lot of these...
what are you getting at here?
Well, I wanted to see if there was like anything that you guys did that was like experimental that wasn't it was like similar to what we did with the hand warmers. Did you have to create your own tools? Did you have to like do kind of improvise on certain kinds of treatments because of the species of the animal? Didn't have enough studies. There wasn't enough information out there to actually know, so you kind of have to kind of figure it out.
Oh, sure. Yeah, our vets were great because they would even let us help look into things like holistically, and they would look into things holistically too. If we found that there was something medical-wise wrong with an animal, like per se a seal who was an amputee, a rear flipper amputee, with what seemed like large lesions on the back of their stump, instead of using like
sulfazidine,
on that, which can be super duper expensive too. We called it liquid gold.
It is liquid gold. That stuff is so expensive.
We used that and it helped a little bit, but then we also tried other things like doing honey. A lot of people use honey on
a good antibiotic.
Yes, and using that on her too. Trying different things. It never hurts to try different things and experiment and see what's what. As long as it's not going to harm them, there's nothing wrong with it. I know we used lots of human medications with the animals. In fact, my husband, when he was doing his doctorate in pharmacy, he actually, for his thesis, he had to do a study, and he worked with the Indy Zoo on the use of omeprazole, so Prilosec, in dolphins. Now, sometimes dolphins will get gastric issues, and usually the way we find that out is that we would work with training the animals to allow us to take a tube, put it to their tummy, down inside of their esophagus, down to their tummy, pull gastric juice out, and then take samples of it and send it to the veterinarian so that they could check and see if they're doing okay. Are they having too much acid in their juice, their gastric juice, and So that way it could help hopefully find out, what was the omeprazole helping? Was the omeprazole harming? Hopefully not, but was it making it too basic? Or
Do they need to switch it?
yeah, exactly. Things like Zantac, Mylanta, Carafate are commonly used in especially dolphin species.
Yep, we
Yeah,
use
and
them
in human
humans
species.
and animals
yeah.
too. I'm on a lot of
Yeah,
that stuff.
so oh, I know.
I've been
I'm
there.
with you there, girl. I know exactly what you mean.
So yeah, this is my binder of just a few of the ones that I've printed out, scientific studies wise.
Mhm.
Because there's not a whole lot of information out there on some of the species, and so like a lot of things it's trial and error, and being able to actually say in regards to Nebula's teeth. Genetic issue is what it is. The gingival hypoplasia is genetic. It eventually can get so bad it closes their airway.
Oh wow.
That's why when we discuss humane euthanasia, it's like when would be the point of no return with this kind of illness, and like River was saying, stem cells. It's when we get ideas like that, we gotta present them to the rest of the board and vote on it. Because we're not like a huge organization like the zoo, which you guys got, your...
We have the
got
zoo would
donors.
have not we, because I'm not really there anymore, but
Yeah.
the zoo would have they have donors. They have
Yeah, certain donors
Yeah.
can sponsor certain...
yeah.
procedures and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Like we had a sponsor for when Gamora, one of our red foxes, her former owners sawed her canine teeth off with a Dremel in their garage. So we had
Oh.
a sponsor that sponsored her x-rays and wanted to make sure that her teeth were fine how they are.
Mhm.
At the time, it was, yes, they're fine for now, but eventually we're going to need to pull them.
Yeah.
And my vet said that the jaw of a fox is too fragile, so we're going to have them pulled over at Purdue. And Purdue's
Mhm.
pretty good about everything that they do. Like,
Oh yeah,
uh,
so lucky to have that school near us. I mean, yeah, it's an hour, 15 minutes away, but man, that's nothing.
Every time
I'll take it.
Every
Yeah.
time we have an issue, like we have a European polecat. Okay, it's like a
Mhm.
big, it's a wild version of a domestic ferret.
Okay.
So we had a European polecat, and he died really young, and we wanted to know why. Okay,
Mhm.
because he was showing neurological symptoms. I wanted to know what was going on, and it got to the point where it was really bad, and I was like, we need to humanely euthanize him. This is just
Mhm.
torture. It's not only torturing him; it's torturing me psychologically to watch. So we took him over to Purdue and found out that he had gallbladder agenesis. He had no gallbladder
Wow.
at all, which is extremely rare in humans and even more rare in an animal. So, and I mean, and we get all the weird cases because one of
Of
our
course.
foxes had agenesis imperfecta of the testes. When we had him neutered, he only had one testicle and one set of just one set of everything, and he didn't have the other set at all. So because he had the whole exploratory to see if he was cryptorchid and everything.
Uh-huh.
Oh, they
And
looked.
Yeah, they looked.
Wow.
Digging all up in there.
They cut him from belly button all the way down to make sure that he didn't have a secondary set in there, and
That's crazy.
yeah, that little brat, he was still at that point where he didn't trust us at all. So I'm sitting there trying to put a cone of shame on a fox
Oh yeah.
who hated humans at that time,
A cone
and
of
he
shame.
bit right through a Kevlar
Oh
glove,
man.
bit right through
Yeah.
it. And I'm sitting here like, oh yeah, he broke every bone in my hand.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where, yeah, it was rough, but then we kind of balanced it out. But are there issues, like, have you guys ever seen anything interesting or rare in any of the animals at the zoo?
In my experience being at the zoo, I don't know that.
I love weird genetic diseases too.
Do you?
I have lupus, so yes, I love weird genetic diseases.
I'm trying to think if we had anything really that was super crazy. Not that I can really think of. We were pretty.
Any kind of weird procedures you had to do, like emergency surgeries?
you were talking about modifications and such.
Yes, modification therapy for behavior,
Well, not that, but modifications to medical.
for medical techniques.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd love to hear those.
So, Brutus the walrus,
Ah.
3,000 pound.
Super cutie. I saw that picture on
My
your
big
Facebook.
baby. He was my big baby. So one of the things that we decided we needed to work on when I was at the zoo was working on nebulizer training.
Oh yeah, for breathing.
Yeah, and the walrus, one of the things about Indiana is that, especially downtown, you're near a river area,
It's too humid.
and you have things like blastomycosis that animals can get, also histoplasmosis from birds and such that animals can contract. So you're always watching for that. You know, you're making sure you clean really well, clean bird feces off and stuff, and making sure that if you do any kind of construction that you're wetting the earth down afterwards so that it holds down if there's any spores or anything there.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we decided was to work on nebulizer training so that we could administer antibiotics and antifungals to the animals straight to their lungs.
All right.
So with Brutus, you know, they don't make masks big enough for a 3,000-pound walrus with his
no.
big old head.
Their heads are bigger than
Yes,
River's
they're
head.
big.
River's head's about the size of a standard basketball.
Oh, yes. So what we decided to do instead was take a road cone and put it over his face,
Oh, that's pretty.
and then take the small part of the road cone that's sticking up at the point
and hook it into the tube.
and hook it into the tube, yeah.
Oh,
And
that's
then that
good.
way we could modify it. And we worked on the walrus breathing in really heavily so that they could take it all in and then, you know, breathe out, like hold it and then breathe out. Also, staff worked on nebulizer training and breathing training with dolphins.
And putting a mask on a walrus or any kind of marine mammal, that's something that you'd have to do months, even maybe years of training on, because you know it's not normal for them to have something on their face
Yeah.
to begin with. I mean,
Yeah.
hell, if I even stick something in my fox's face, they're either going to take it and run for me and then go put it in a corner and pee on it,
Uh-huh.
or they're going to bite me and be like, "This
Yeah.
is mine. I got it."
Yeah,
And-
lots of desensitization. That's
Mhm.
the big thing. And
Lots of baby steps.
oh yes, and working slowly,
Mhm.
never trying to jump ahead too fast, just trying to ease into those behaviors and bringing the next, you know, like you said, baby steps, bringing in the next part. Okay, first we introduce them to the cone
Mhm.
and
the
reinforce for that,
and the
then
sound of the machine.
yes, the sound of the machine, all of the hookups and stuff, the tank,
And the
y-
feeling of
this-
the air blowing in their face.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
would be something that would be interesting.
feeling maybe some droplets of water, or, you know,
Mist, yeah.
on
Yeah.
their face. Yeah, just, and more people standing around too. You know,
Mhm.
you're going to have the vets, maybe a couple other folks who are going to be there too, the techs, plus you. And so getting them used to having a lot of people around.
Do you
is
guys try to
super
use the
important, too.
same people to work with the same animals so that the way the scents from new different people don't bother them?
It
as much?
usually, it's funny because it usually, we felt so bad for the vets because a lot of times the animals, it was like they sensed that here they come. We
Oh,
we
that
know who
makes
those
sense.
are.
This
Here
guy
they are.
smells like a hospital.
Yes, we know what this means. You know, just like your dog or your
Mhm.
cat would. And one of the things that we really tried to do with our vets is allow them to give the animals reinforcement,
That makes sense.
so that in primary reinforcement, so food.
So you don't always see them as a bad thing.
Yes, and do a few behaviors with them and love on them. You know, look, I'm not all that bad, you know, or just come out for a love session and not do anything. I'm not going to do anything to you today. Whoa, totally new concept, you know.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, and
I
with us, it's what we would do as a team, working at the zoos. We would have certain behaviors that we would train, and we would have maybe 2 primary people on them,
Mhm.
and on that one behavior,
Mhm.
and then train the animal to do it successfully, and then open it up to other trainers. Yeah, so that then it can be maintained.
Mhm.
And if something falls
Yeah.
backward, then we would go back and focus on it again. You know,
Yeah,
every
'cause-
once in a while they'll regress.
Yeah.
And that's
Oh, yeah.
that's okay.
That's
we
the-
regress on things too.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, that was fine.
River
Yeah.
regresses a lot. I've spent 8 years training that thing.
Aw.
I'm a tough one to break.
He cries in the corner often.
Aw.
She's so mean and strict. But for example, like when we were discussing like modifying, you know, how we do things when it comes to veterinary treatments, we have African genet. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this little things. It's a 2 to 4 pound animal. It's a little feliform, okay? With its tail, it's probably about yay long. About, you know, for those who can't see, it's about 4 feet long with the tail. Their tails are as long as their bodies, and I call her my little 2-pound spotted demon because she's 2 pounds of bottled napalm.
Uh-huh.
And they got this little triangle face, kind of like a ferret, okay? They got
Okay.
a little triangular shaped face. And I mean, even when it comes to, you know, the avian clinic up north for the veterinarians, they don't even have masks for ferrets when it comes to anesthesia. So like when it comes to Nakia going to the vet, when I took her to the vet's office, she absolutely like flipped her shit, running around that room. I couldn't even catch her. And these guys have little thumbs, okay, on their back feet, and that's so they can run up and down trees directly. And they're an arboreal species. They
Or
like
up
to
and
be,
down you.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. And there's and their claws feel like when they scratch you, it's like paper cuts.
Oh.
Okay, so you won't see them on your hands until you sanitize your hands, and you're like, gosh, it burns, son of a biscuit, you know. And then you're like, oh shit, oh, I remember now. I was playing with the Janet, but like when it comes to him, I could hand feed her chicken hearts right out of my hand. He has to use tongs because she'll rip him a new one. I bottle fed her when she was 4 weeks old, so.
You guys have that bond.
We have a bond together, and then she looks at him like he's a piece of meat.
She gives him the stink eye.
She
I
does.
have certain times of the day is when I'm allowed to touch her.
There's only certain times of the day, but he's not allowed to go in her enclosure.
Once the sun goes down, I'm not going near that thing.
Yeah, he's not allowed to go inside her enclosure because she won't let him. I can go in the enclosure, but he's not allowed to go in the enclosure. I have to. So like when we took her to the vet for her rabies vaccine. This was I think my deciding factor on having the vet come out to us from then on, because she flipped her crap like running all over the office, and they're very flexible animals. Okay, they're kind of like a slinky almost. And it's worse than when everybody looks at ferret. You could practically bend a ferret in half. No. Janet's teleport, okay? They'll be next to you, and then the next minute they're across the room. And you're like, what the hell? How did she get all the way over there? No, this creature was so terrified to be in that medical facility. She was literally running along the walls. And I finally got her back into her little Sherpa carriers, soft-sided carriers for airlines. And we ended up having to give her the vaccine while she was inside the carrier. I used the bike gloves, and she was wiggling around and using her back feet, and I mean, and having those leather gloves, the Kevlar gloves on your hands, and you're not as flexible as you would be.
They're so bulky.
But they have little tiny teeth like a cat, and of course, cats, anything with small, teeny tiny teeth like that, you have a better chance of getting infected. You can get cellulitis, you can get MRSA, you can get just about anything from those little tiny teeth because it holds so much bacteria.
I like to call it Mrs. A.
Yes.
Instead of MRSA, I'm like, Mrs. A.
Yeah. Yeah, Mrs. Pain in the A.
Yeah.
But because you can lose a damn hand from that. But like when I saw how bad it stressed her out just to be in the facility, I mean, she was fine in the car right there. She was looking at me and everything else.
She was used to going out and about with you guys, right?
Nope.
Oh, she didn't?
No, this was
oh,
when
wow.
she was still
so she
really
just like
small.
she's like, ooh, car.
It was her first time.
Oh my gosh.
Since I brought her back from Florida, I flew to Florida to pick her up.
Okay.
And I flew back. I was literally down there for like a day. I flew down there, I picked her up, and I flew back the next day. And it was cheaper than driving.
Yeah.
I don't like driving through the mountains. But, like, when I got her, she was a little tiny thing. And, you have to wait a certain amount of times. And because, there's only certain vaccines you can give these animals, you don't want to take them outside too often and expose them to... Because they are feliformia, they can get diseases that cats can get. So you don't want to get them exposed to those types of things before they're a certain age, And she was... And when it comes to exotic animals, they usually... In the exotic pet trade, when people sell those animals, they sell them at 4 weeks old, so they're better bond with human beings. Yeah. Me and you are squinting right now. We're squinting because we're like...
Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to domestic animals, the law says you've got to sell them at 8 weeks or older. When it comes to exotic animals, the USDA does not have a law on how old you can sell a exotic animal to somebody at. Which some breeders, they will not sell them any younger than 4 weeks. Some breeders, it depends on if the person has experience, if they want to let the animal go at 2 weeks, and it creates a larger bond or whatever when it comes to that. But getting her at 4 weeks, as opposed to my friend who got their Janet at 8 weeks, their Janet they can't even interact with their Janet. They're watching videos of me and Nakia together, and they're like, "How do you get your Janet to do that?" Because like, mine's just mean, and well. When it comes to their little triangle faces, there's no there's no masks that you can put on their face if they have to go under for anesthesia. Like, say, if you need to do a hysterectomy, or treat for pyometra by, whatever means, even vaccinations wise, you're lucky if you can, like, stick them with that whole pre-anesthetic where they're all like, yes,
Yeah.
I'm knocked out, like we do with the foxes.
Mhm.
We kind of knock them out before we take them in back. But when it come to her, she was just freaking out over a rabies vaccine. They can only have the rabies vaccine. Same with the fennec foxes and the pale fox. Only rabies vaccine, even though it's not proven effective.
Mm-hmm.
You still have to have it.
We still have
Yeah.
to have it by law. But yeah, we drop Rabarol from freaking airplanes all the time. We know it works, but it's not. There's no scientific studies saying that we've actually done tests on it to see that we can actually eradicate rabies in the United States.
Yeah.
Britain has already eradicated rabies. Most of Europe's eradicated rabies. The United States is way behind.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you don't have to worry too much about rabies and, like, the marine mammals.
Yeah,
that do.
you guys. I think polar bears could probably get it, but
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't.
because they
Yeah.
can. They're like foragers. If they're eating Arctic foxes, they can definitely get rabies.
I'm sure if there's a rabid polar bear,
possibly.
we would have heard about it.
Yeah.
You know what? I might Google that while we're thinking about it.
That's a good question. Yeah, I've never thought about a polar bear getting rabies. Yeah. no.
1989, November 1st, 1989.
Did you really find something?
I did. The very first confirmed case of rabies in a polar bear.
Huh.
It was encountered by Inuit hunters in Cape Kendall, in Canada.
Oh, great. I know what I'm going to be dreaming about tonight.
Yeah, I would not want to be running from that.
Yeah, I wouldn't. No, there's no
Mm-mm-mm.
way. Because your black bears and brown bears and grizzly bears, they can get rabies too. And polar bears, they're more in colder regions, and you think, well, possums can't get it because their body temperature is too low.
Mhm.
You're thinking, can a polar bear get it?
Yeah.
So
If they did, the person who saw it
Interesting.
probably didn't live long enough to tell anyone about it.
pretty much.
Yeah.
Those poor Eskimos that got bit by them rabid bears.
Oh, man. Ay, ay, ay.
Yeah, well, eventually, as of now, the only way to test for rabies is to euthanize the animal humanely, cut their head off and test for brain
Yeah.
matter. Eventually, one day, we will figure out a way to diagnose rabies without having to kill the animal.
That would be awesome.
It would be interesting to be able to cure rabies as well. But because it attacks the brain and eats holes in the
Mhm.
brain, it's like even if you get it, you're going to have some sort of brain damage and behavioral issues afterwards.
Mhm.
It's kind of like there's a psychological disorder where the brain is kind of like Swiss cheese and it can cause like aggression and I can't remember what it was called. It's degenerative, but it can cause aggression and it can trigger certain people to kill
Huh.
other humans. So
Almost like a zombie disease.
yeah, kind of like a zombie disease, but I don't know. It was something that they found in a couple of serial killers. I saw it on an Investigation Discovery at one point a few years ago, but I'll have to look it up. We'll discuss that another time.
I
Yeah.
like that. Well,
That's
you
a whole
know how
nother
they always
topic.
like show like on some of those shows they'll show MRIs of individuals that might have had like schizophrenia and had some other kind of psychoses, and maybe how this part of their brain was affected more than another part of the brain, as opposed to another person who didn't have issues or tendencies for murder or what have you. So yeah.
And then there's that junk science about men born with the 2 duplicate chromosomes.
Oh yes, I've heard about
The
that.
junk science. This is a serial killer gene. No, that's junk science. That's exactly what that is. Okay, that's junk. But like when it comes to certain things, when it comes to genetics, I love genetics. That's my
That's
jam.
your forte.
That's my jam.
That's your
Call that
jam.
jamnetics. All right. So like a lot of my scientific studies. There's
Yeah, we're not getting into that right
yeah, it's just like everything. I'll give you my Google Drive.
Hey,
I would love
awesome.
to read your husband's thesis though about
Yeah.
the studies that
I'll
he
have to
did.
dig that up for you.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in that. Well, shit, you see my exotic animal. Hematology and cytology. So when you guys do blood draws on those types of animals, when you need to like say draw blood on say a dolphin or walrus, you got specific commands like hand signals, or
Sure,
do you use
yeah.
verbal commands or both?
Sometimes both. It depends on the animal. The dolphins, aren't necessarily as auditory, which kind of sounds strange because you
Yeah.
know,
Well, they
they're
use
li-
echolocation.
they're more body language and visual with
Okay.
us when we were working with them.
I
So
saw the dolphin show, and they used a lot of hand signals.
Uh-huh.
We use
Yeah.
those with all of our animals,
Yeah.
too.
I'd say they're auditory when it comes to when we bridge. So we blow a whistle, and
Mhm.
which that's the bridge between the behavior and the reinforcement.
Mhm.
And they know that the reinforcement's on the way. They did the behavior correctly, and we would then reinforce with primary or secondary reinforcement. But we'd use a lot of hand signals. With the dolphins, one of the things we had worked on when I was a trainer was having them present themselves to us. So you might start off with a dolphin where you just are rubbing on them, loving on them, reinforcing them from just you touching them, doing the desensitization again, the baby steps, and then maybe just manipulating their body into the way that you
Yeah.
want them to be manipulated for that blood draw
Mm.
or for that ultrasound or for that x-ray, and then just taking all those baby steps. So for a blood draw for a dolphin,
It's the flipper, right?
their
Or the
tail
dorsal-
fluke.
Tail fluke? on
Yeah,
a
tail
dolphin?
fluke is really typically where you take it from the top or the bottom, subdorsal or ventral side of the tail fluke. When I worked there, we typically did it from the
bottom.
ventral. Yeah, they have their veins don't actually pop out like ours do.
Mhm.
They don't protrude.
Mhm.
They sink in, and so they have one really prominent vein that runs along
The tail.
the tail fluke, and
Hmm.
some animals you would have to stick a little bit above or a little bit below, but we would reinforce for them, allowing us to, just like we were talking about the polar bear and the voluntary injection, stick them with a little paper clip, don't draw blood or anything, but just over and over again and reinforcing them.
Getting them used to
Yeah,
that
so-
type of feeling in that
Yeah,
position
and
of their
holding
body.
holding that breath too, because they aren't necessarily in their habitat. They're not necessarily having to hold their breath for
Mhm.
long periods of time,
Mhm.
like they might if they were diving, in the open ocean. So getting them to understand that, hey, I need you to hold your breath for a little bit and not like flip over while I'm in the middle of, a vet trying to get a blood sample and then you completely ruin it, is one of the things that you have to kind of work on, getting them to understand. And it just needs to be that communication between the animal and the trainer of what expectations are.
And we were discussing
I'm just trying to think of what a veiny dolphin would look like over here.
A veiny dolphin.
who would look like the Hulk. We call it Hulk fin.
Hulk
And so we're gonna discuss. I think I want to touch on this too. Some people have asked before why the orca or killer whale's dorsal fin flops over when they're in captivity. And do you know exactly why that happens?
I've heard varying
There's
theories.
different theories of what I was reading.
I really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some people have theorized that it's because they're in captivity and they have a breakdown of the cartilage in their dorsal fin, and
depression.
yeah,
That's the one I hear a lot.
I guess I've never really researched it either. Looking at what about in the wild? Do they have dorsal fins that flop over, or do they
I've
not?
seen a couple.
So I mean, it could just be individualistic
Or genetic.
Yeah, could be genetic.
Especially if you see a pod of whales out in the wild that have dorsal fins,
floppy dorsals.
Yeah, floppy
Yeah,
dorsal.
the old floppy
Florsals.
Yeah, dorsals. Yeah,
It's a flaccid dorsal fin.
but I know that there's varying theories about that between animal rights activists and
Don't get me started on PETA.
Pretty much
we don't even want to go there.
Okay. For those
But
those who aren't familiar, please visit the website PETAkillsAnimals.com. There's tons of information and proven documentation that PETA kills almost 90% of the animals they bring into their facilities.
No, we're not getting started on that.
Yeah,
now.
we're not going to get started on that. Just go and look at the actual
We're
evidence.
running long enough as it is.
Oh.
Yeah, there's me. I like to ramble and I will talk for days. If it's about animals, I will talk for days.
Well, so are there any, of your favorite stories that you might happen to have from the zoo, working with these animals?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, we had
I'm sure you got some pretty funny ones or something.
I had a male sea lion. His name was Alpha. And Alpha would go and find things in the habitat if you asked him to. And usually it was
All right.
toys. Like if you had a toy out there and you didn't want to have to go and fish it out, or
Go
get
get this
in
for
and go
me.
get it.
Go get the
Yeah,
ball.
you're like, go find it.
Go get your ball. Where's your ball?
Exactly. And there were caves underneath in the habitat too. So they could go and find it on the roof of the cave or what have you.
Yeah.
So one time I was doing a presentation and I was talking at the same time and working with him. And I asked him to go find. Didn't realize there weren't any toys out there. I thought there was still a ball out there. So he proceeded to bring me a turd. And I had my hand out. I was all ready. I thought, oh, he's bringing me a rock. And he goes, and spits it out in my hand in front of everybody. And I was like, okay, well, he did bring me back something. So I washed my hands off in the water and reinforce them. But yeah, it's funny, some of the things that the animals come up with on their own. You know, they can be,
well, example is creating our fox box out of plywood has created a I don't know. I don't know who started it, but somebody decided they were going to start chewing on that wood, and now I need to fix the whole thing. It's like, oh man, this is a nightmare. How many of y'all have eaten the splinters? How many
Well, they chew on it.
flossing their teeth. But sticks. What was that? Do you guys do the floating woods and stuff? The floating wood that you guys can toss in the water for those guys?
I don't know if they used floating
driftwood?
wood or anything for the animals there. Some zoos will use like the
Fake
fake wood, like the recycled lumber, or they might use skids, the plastic skid pallets. Those are really nice to put reinforcement in and hide it with ice and Jello and stuff like that, so they can forage.
We use wooden ones to do framing. I'm like, I will, if someone's giving away wood pallets, I'm gonna use them.
Well, how about working with Brutus the walrus?
Yeah. What's
You
your
seem
favorite
to get
story
along
with
pretty well
him?
with him.
I want to know the favorite story.
When Brutus bitch slapped somebody one time.
Okay, I need to hear this whole thing.
They were just doing a behavior with him. I think he was in a down in a ventral position, so he was belly up. And I don't know exactly what she asked for, if she asked for him to put his flipper over on one side, but he did it so abruptly that it was like smack, and she was like, you know.
Was it a resounding?
Yeah, and and I wasn't there when it happened. When I heard about it, it was a belly laugh because I'm like, oh Lord. But you know, working with those animals, you always have to be super cautious. Yes, and having a bond with them is amazing, but you always have that in the back of your mind that they are wild animals.
Oh yeah.
They still can do some damage, you know. And I mean, if he ran you over, you're a pancake.
What, 3,000 pounds, wasn't it?
Yeah, 3,000 pounds. You know, you're going to be a pancake. If he hits you with his head, I mean, their skulls are like 6 to 8 inches thick, so they can bust through ice to make breathing holes.
Yeah, I guess so.
I mean, their heads are like bulldozers. So, and their tusks, not to mention their tusks, you know, they impale you with those tusks, and it's going to be a hot mess.
Shit.
You know, on your way to the hospital. So,
how many scars do you have over there, River, from the foxes alone?
No, I lost track of those. I'm not sure I could count them though.
Yeah.
The biggest one comes from the genet.
Yeah, his biggest ones come from my genet, my little 2-pound animal.
A little small thing just makes the biggest injuries.
I'd have to say, you know, like sometimes too, animals will put you in their hierarchy or their grouping. If they're getting picked on, you know, if they're having displaced aggression, you know, aggression displaced on them, then they need something to put their displaced frustration or aggression on. And sometimes the next best thing is a human that's closest to them.
This is the human that does not read their body language.
Oh,
I'm still learning.
I've been trying to train it for 8 years.
It's not always easy.
It's not always easy.
No. There's not really, I wouldn't say there's even like.
There's people like me who just.
There's an art and a science to animal. I think animal.
Yeah, it's an art and a science.
Working with animals. And I mean, you can read everything you want in a book, but then you really don't know until you are in there and you're with them.
Hands on.
Yes.
Getting bit in the neck by a fox.
Aww.
Yeah, okay, so like...
A vampire fox.
Yeah, well, I call them vampires because they blood suck all my money away. So like, what was it? When he was carrying Drax out to the outdoor enclosure, our little fennec foxes, we had just got them. I like to try and keep them in the bedroom so they can get used to our scent, you know, used to us walking by them, used to us touching them, stuff like that before we put them in their own space. So that way, you know, they're if fennec foxes are really hard to rehome because they don't normally rebond. Same with red foxes.
Okay.
When you get that kind of thing, you know, a fennec fox's natural, you know, instinct is to dig. And
yeah.
you know those like ferret nation cages. We had one that was like 3 tiers tall, and he was up at the top. Legolas was up at the top just digging on that plastic when Tyler was coming in, or River's coming in through the door with Drax in his arms, and that scratching on that plastic scared
Set him off. Yeah.
And he like bit the crap out of River's neck and hand, and of course, you know, we put that as a warning. Yet this is why foxes don't make a good pet. And then, you know, we get animal rights activists or other people who just don't like what we do, and they're all like, "Oh, they're not good facility. They get bit by their animals." I swear to the gods, if someone says that they do not get bit by the animals in their care, they are so full of shit that it's overflowing. I mean, like the elephant turds over at the zoo are not nearly as high as the shit that they're full of.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, anytime, I mean, when you're working with animals like that day in and day out, there's going to be instances where, you know, something happens. You can do so much to try to prevent, but it's never going to be 100%.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you have animals with, like dolphins, super sharp teeth, super powerful tails. They're going to fluke people, which is when they hit, you know.
with the tail.
Yeah, and maybe you're just in the way, or maybe you're getting displaced aggression on you, you know, because another animal's pestering them and you don't realize it.
Yeah.
Or
The
they
sound
might
is scaring them.
Yeah.
Something that they hear 3-4 blocks away that humans can't hear.
Yeah.
For example, what was it, a couple years ago when they were doing roofing, like 4 or 5 blocks over, and then the guy that had the tree trimming, he was trimming the trees 4 or 5 blocks over. We didn't know it, and then we went out to the enclosure to, you know, pick up the foxes and you know, move them, you know, back to where they're supposed to go and whatever like that, and then you get bit. It's like, do we need to get the catch pole out? Do we need to bring the crate out here? We need to play hopscotch pretty much with what do we need to do? What is triggering this kind of behavior? And then, you know, just take the car around, because we do have our facility in the city limits, so we take the car around, see what is going on within the radius of
Good idea.
of that. Because I mean, a fox's territory is pretty large. I mean, in general, and of course, we have one fox, Star-Lord, who doesn't like the other foxes. We do not put her with the other foxes. She gets her own time in her own space because she's just a bitch. Okay, she's mean, and she's the only fox that likes Tyler.
Oh.
So.
Well, this is not the podcast about foxes. So.
But
well, do you have anything else you'd like to share?
Do you guys have issues with that, where you have marine mammals that just favor one trainer over another?
Oh, sure. Yeah, they'll find their favorite, you know, person. They'll bond with them. I've had animals that didn't particularly care for, you know, me.
It happens.
I mean, there was a seal that I worked with one time. She adored a lot of the staff that I worked with, but she and I were just like
water and oil.
Oh my gosh, I swear every time. And I did everything I could, you know, to try to bond with her, but she and I just were not. And it's like you can't make every human happy, you can't make every animal happy. But there are animals that I felt that I bonded with very closely, especially like Brutus.
Oh, yeah.
That I may be able to do something with him that someone else would not get away with. But that's just built on trust, a lot of trust, and knowing his behavior and being with him day in and day out for hours, and
knowing, watching, making sure.
Animal behavior, it's awesome.
It's fun.
I
it's
love
better
it.
than human behavior.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I don't think so. I'm really excited about you guys doing these podcasts. I think that's totally awesome.
It's important, and the reason why we started doing this is we get a lot of the same questions. If you visit our website, you'll go on our frequently asked questions page, and you'll read that
I went
stuff.
on there and I was like,
there's so many things, and that's not even half of them.
Yeah.
That's not even half of the stuff we get asked. And we were like, well, what if we did a podcast and started discussing some of this stuff? We need to discuss not only captive bred species, but we need to discuss Indiana's native wildlife as well.
Yes.
Because, I mean...
All about wildlife.
All about wildlife. Because, I mean, we had a wildlife rehabber on last week.
Ma'am, are you going to start derailing again?
Yes. I'm going to derail this train.
I like how you're like, summarizing every episode within this episode.
I
There's
love
just
it.
so much to talk
There
about.
is. There's a lot. But, like, I mean, you know, people like pulling out wild animals from the wild and bringing them in their house and stuff like that. So we're like, this isn't legal. You can't do this. And they won't listen to us, of course. You know, we're horrible people. And they cuss us out on social media for it.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's like, well,
Yeah.
if
And then
we
you
can-
have some people that are just, I mean, they're softies, and you know
They don't
can't-
intend
they don't
to be bad,
understand.
but
Yeah,
they
they don't
don't.
have bad intentions. It's just that
they don't.
they don't really think about what the consequences
Consequences,
the
yeah.
long-term consequences might be, and it's good if you're able to
Help them.
bring
Help.
this out publicly and help them understand some of the guidelines and reasonings and consequences, and those are super important.
I do think they are pretty important.
Well, yeah. Well, thanks for coming on. And
Hey,
talking
thanks
with us
for
a little
having
bit.
me. I had fun.
Oh, yeah. If anyone would like to find out any of our socials or website, we've got all of our links are on linktree.com/wizardofpawswildlife. And, of course, if you'd like to join our Patreon and help support the animals and this podcast, feel free to check us out at patreon.com/wizardofpawswildlife. There you can also get bonus content, some episodes released early, even get an invite to our private Discord to talk with us and some of the guests we have on. And with that, I think I would just like to thank Alisa for coming out, talking to us about some marine mammals. Of course, a nice thank you to Alan, who does the editing here for our show and all the shows on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And also, thanks to the Podcast Network for having us here.
Yes, we love being here.
And with that, I think that'll do it for episode 4 of the Wizard of Paws podcast. And we'll see you all next week.
Have a fantastic day.